This is Mike, and it is March 16th, 2020, and it's bright. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about the medical industry and the psychology of going through that process. And the reason why I want to do that now is because, with all of this coronavirus, uh, what do you want to call it? This thing we're going through, because we're going through something like, this is what it looks like to go through something. Um, it is being hinged upon the institution of the medical establishment. And so we're going to look a little bit deeper into that. And we're going to begin with, and we're gonna begin by talking about like a background where it all came from, and then I want to talk a little bit about what it does to an individual to go through it, and then we'll have maybe a better understanding as to how to navigate everything, which is coming down the pike, talking to other people, just framing things up in your own mind, because this is, as they say, we're all in this together, and to have a greater level of awareness. You and one other person are in a conversation, and there tends to be one of the two people who has more awareness than the other, or at least to a certain level, until both have a certain level of awareness. And so if you are someone who has more awareness than the other person in a conversation, there is a responsibility that comes with it. There's a maturity, and with that maturity is the responsibility, which is like, you got to understand where these people are coming from, and then it will serve you in terms of like how you're going to communicate with them, how effective you're going to be, and then also how to navigate the situation. So yeah, we're going to talk about medicine and doctors and all that stuff. So it's pretty much well established that, or well known, I guess. So, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you know your stuff, and you know that both the medical the medical system and medical education, and really all education for that, are byproducts of the Rockefellers, and they have done that. And how you're able to, like, say like, oh, the Rockefellers did it is, they had foundations, and it was through the foundations which they gave money to certain projects which they wish to see succeed. And the foundations came about with the change of what, like, there's some tax laws. I don't think it was income tax. What was it? There was something about, like, coming out of the Gilded Age, they changed some of the tax laws, and it behooved the very, very wealthy families to create these nonprofit foundations, and it was a way for them to keep their financial assets, and not have to pay taxes on it, something like that. It's been a while since I looked at it. So anyway, so that's where, like, you get the Carnegie Foundation, you get the Rockefeller Foundation, you get all of these foundations from these very wealthy families from like the late 1800s, because it wasn't so much that it was about philanthropy as much as it was like, this is just how a loophole, because the whole game is a game of loopholes. It's understanding law, and then understanding the loopholes, and that's either spiritual law, or that's, like the legal law. It's all reflections of the same thing, but it's loopholes. And so foundations were created as more or less tax loopholes, and it allowed wealthy families, whatever you want to call it. The families tend to be the Rockefellers are said to be agents of the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds are said to be agents of, like, interdimensional beings. Wherever it comes from, I don't know, but like where it comes to, like, just regular human beings, like who have to pay taxes, who aren't pulling the strings in life. That's the story, or the level which I want to tell that. So like the Rockefellers, they created foundations, and through these foundations they were able to fund different movements which they wanted to see succeed, and it's good public relations. The Rockefellers have a long history of some really nasty behavior, particularly, when you think about the coal mines in West Virginia. So the foundations, they look good on paper, but they've always served like a higher direction. And you decide wherever you think that direction originates, but this is where the rubber meets the road. And so the Rockefellers, going back to like the 1800s, like education systems were different. One of the nice things about living in Lancaster County is you see these Amish single-room schoolhouses, and you get a little bit of insight of like what education used to be like. And I spent some time working on a farm with the Amish, and it was really interesting to just like to compare and contrast like different styles of communication, and just like hearing where their minds were out, and their analysis and their problem solving, and just like they had a very different type of education model than at least what I am familiar with. And so it was fascinating to see how once we as people living in the United States, assuming you're living in the United States, like how we were educated. The education system changed, and it changed through the Rockefeller Foundation. And at the same time, the Rockefeller Foundation, they changed the way which medicine was conducted. There was once upon a time, there's all sorts of different types of medical practices in the United States. And now, we basically just have one. We have this allopathic medical system. And what happened was really two things occurred. There was this thing called the Flexner report came out. And it was an analysis of all of the different medical schools. And the purpose of it was to really identify there was some bad medicine which was being done. And so this was like, we're going to get to the bottom of it, and we're going to only have like accredited universities, and we're going to have like the best medical system on the planet. And this was the Flexner report kind of laid out the structure. And the Flexner report was, I think it was originally like the Carnegie Foundation like funded it, and then the Rockefeller Foundation, and they were implementing the recommendations of from the Flexner report. And as a result of both like the damning of certain types of educations, and I'm not saying everything in the Flexner report was bad, I'm just saying this changed how things were done before. And what we think of as medical school now, and what we think about in terms of education, like all of it comes from the Flexner report. And the Flexner report had recommendations, and the Rockefeller Foundation, they put up a lot of the money to make these recommendations come into existence. And so like one of the ways they would do is the Flexner report set up an accreditation system, or at least they gave recommendations. And because of that, like all these medical schools that did not meet these certain thresholds, they weren't accredited, and they eventually went out of business. But like the Rockefeller Foundation set up they funded what the institution to accredit, so all of the other institutions. So it was like this complete circle where like, okay, well, we're going to come up with the rules of like of what is official, and then we're going to create the institution which goes around and certifies who's official, and then we're going to go and we're going to fund. And that's what they did, was they started funding chairs at colleges and universities or medical schools. They would pay to have medical schools started, and they would have control of the chair, like, the leadership within the medical school. And it was through that, by selecting people who are sympathetic to a certain perspective, that you can go and drive change in a very, very subtle sort of way, like very, effective change. The medical system we have right now all began with this Flexner report. And so Flexner was, he was very involved with education, with both regular education and with medical schools. He also was the founder of the Institute of Advanced Study. Now, that's something really, really to understand, like our technological age. Like that is this Institute of Advanced Study is where everything took place. It's where like Einstein hung out with like John von Neumann, and all of these different people kind of came together. It was more of like uh, uh, a precursor to the Esalen Institute in California. This is out in Princeton, where like all of these intellectual heavyweights were like brought together, and they didn't have any responsibility except for like hanging out and like uh, coming up with some really interesting ideas. So Flexner's behind that as well. But why I'm really getting into Flexner right now, what I think is really interesting was Flexner had two other brothers. Actually, I think he had probably like five, but there are two other brothers which are of note, or at least that I'm aware of. And they, when you look at the full amount of influence that these three brothers from where are they from? I think like Kentucky, yeah, Louisville, Kentucky. The influence they had, they were born in the late 1800s and died in like the early part of the 1900s. They've had a huge amount of influence on life today, and you want to understand life today, you got to understand how we got here. So at one point it wasn't like this, and this is, these are the steps. So the Flexners, all three of them were very close to the Rockefellers. So we talked about Abraham Flexner, and so then we have Simon Flexner. Simon Flexner was the first director of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. So this is 1901 to 1935. If you know your Rockefeller history, you know this was a eugenics program. The entire Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, like this was all dedicated to eugenics. And so this guy was the first director, and this was when the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which is now Rockefeller University, came into existence. It was Simon Flexner who was the leader, the first director. And he was also a friend advisor to John D. Rockefeller Jr. So Abraham's his brother, and Abraham like does the Flexner report, and then the Flexner report is used by really it's the blueprint for what our modern medical system looks like, or at least our medical education system, which creates our medical system. So this is how we move to a certain way of understanding medicine but then also there was a very specific way which the education of doctors occurs in this country, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But we need to understand this is where it all began. So you got Simon, you got Abraham. And then you got Bernard. And so Bernard, this guy was a prominent member of the Zionist Organization of America. He was one of the main advisors for at the Paris Peace Conference after World War I, like all the stuff that really set up the establishment of the state of Israel, and also a lot of the events of World War II, where they were movements in order for the state of Israel to come into existence. If it wasn't for the way World War II occurred, and then even more so the way the story was told to us, if it wasn't for that, there'd be no state of Israel. So Bernard was very involved with the early steps, 20, 30 years before even the establishment of Israel. He was counsel. But even more interesting is the fact that he was one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefeller being another. So we see like all of these organizations, they're all connected. They're all connected at the same time, and they've come into great influence into how our life and how our world is structured. So the point of all this, or what I want to talk about, is like the general mindset of a doctor. You know, what if you're a doctor, if you're a medical doctor and you went through the American Medical Doctor Program, you went through a system which was designed to create a certain product. And I'm being general here because, like, you know, every doctor, every human being is different. You know, I went through a lot of programs which programmed me, and I seem to, you know, I think the way I think now. I don't think it is exactly what a match of the program I went through, but it's one of the reasons why I think I understand programming so well is because I've been through it. But you know, the same is true with doctors. Doctors went through some very, very major programming. And generally speaking, it's going to create a very, very specific type of person. And you need to understand that when we're talking about all of this medical stuff which is going on. And we need to go and understand like where this all came from. It came from these guys right here. It came from the Rockefellers. It came from Council on Foreign Relations. It came from the same players. You know, the World Health Organization, that's United Nations. This is all they're all from the same people, the medical industry, the globalist industry, all of them, all of this is connected. You know, you can go and see it very, very tightly from the very beginnings. And so part of what we're seeing right now is it's from its establishment was always connected. So okay, so the mindset of a doctor. So medical school is, let me make certain we covered all the good stuff about, before I move on, I want to see if there's anything else. This is just basically talking about how eugenics really was the beginning of the Institute of Medical Research, and Simon Flexner, about how he was, you know, the institute, the leader. You know, there's just an article in that. It doesn't take too hard of searching to find out about the eugenics connection with the Rockefeller Institution. And I saw this too. I mean, this is mainstream enough to be on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not going to say anything about eugenics, but it does talk about this sexual misconduct case from all the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where dozens of boys were molested and photographed by this one doctor there, and like it seemed to be like everyone knew about it. And, you know, this should sound pretty familiar. Like, you know, everyone knows about what goes on in Hollywood. Like everyone knows about what Harvey Weinstein, what his behavior set was like. And so it's like that's part of this story as well. So but let's go on over to let's go over to doctors. And so the reason why this is important is because right now at this particular time with everything which is going on with this virus, it's the we're going back to at least 50 to 60 years of cultural programming of putting doctors up on this pedestal. You know, the doctor is the best. The doctor is both emotionally and compassionately driven to have made so much sacrifice that they have made caring for others their top you know, destiny or pursuit. And I'm not saying that doctors aren't compassionate, but I'm just saying this is the story which has been told in our media, you know, starting back with, you know, movies from the 40s and 50s and soap operas, and just like, you know, how many shows are about doctors? You know, think about how many shows are about friggin' doctors. And so that's just been part of it. And then the other part is like, you know, doctors are super duper smart, and doctors are super duper smart, but they're only telling you part of the equation. So first off is, well, what we're seeing happening is there's a very specific type of person which is going to get into medical school, and then once you go through medical school, it is going to exasperate certain types of qualities. And again, this is generally speaking. Individual doctors are gonna respond in different ways, but generally speaking, what we're seeing is the biggest yes men and the most brainwashed as like the go-to experts. So you got the media pointing over to like the doctors, like, hey, you know, the doctor says this, and you know about doctors, they're great, they're compassionate, they're smarter than all of us. Which, you know, all right, so let's get into this. So and this is a common sort of technique which is used which is used in the public, yeah, a lot. When you're structuring like this control of the public, you do it by like kind of like flipping who's in charge of whom. Like often, like, you know, the person who's got like the most amount of you know, maybe a stigma, not, or like an anger towards like another group of people. There's always going to be like a charge, like who's in charge, like whoever has the influence, like the dynamic. It's always going to be a little bit bumpy, and I'm going to give you an example right now. So we're going to talk about like the TSA. So we're going to bring this all back. Just trust me. So TSA. So before 9/11, before September 11th, there was no TSA. No such thing as TSA. And then TSA came around. Like all the stuff, like all of the molestation which happens, which we all kind of be like, yep, you know, I gotta fly, and you know, and everyone knows, like, you know, the TSA does nothing, right? I mean, that's statistically proven that they have not stopped anything. And I'm not shitting on any TSA member. I mean, maybe some of the people are kind of crappy, but basically what they've done is the TSA was established this way. They took, and I'm not trying to be crass here, but I'm going to use money as an example. And I make no money. Like, I don't make much money, so I'm not saying this from a high up place. I'm saying this from just like, you know, this is how our culture works and our status. So it's like, where do we got this right here? So from salary expectations for airport security jobs, is from the TSA website. I think I found it. It's like the airport security. So your typical TSA guy is making somewhere between $25,000 and $38,000 a year. That's a salary. And then you go and you look at that compared to like the fast food industry, and the median annual salary of just like a dude who's making your French fries is 22 grand a year, and the assistant manager of the McDonald's is probably making about 40 grand a year. So we've got like this TSA job somewhere, like the same person who's debating on, do I want to take do I want to be an assistant manager at McDonald's? And again, I'm not judging anyone. You know, I hats off to someone who's working that job. You know, they're providing the service to someone. But this person has been put in charge of everyone who's flying. And chances are this guy's not flying too much themselves, or this girl's not flying too much themselves. And maybe there's like, you know, there's a little bit of resentment, and maybe there's like a little bit of, and like, guess what? Now I'm in control of you. Now I get to go and do whatever I want. I'll take, you know, maybe you need a secondary screening. You know, that's the type of like charge which is being created. There's always going to be like this charge. They did this right after the colonies were first set up. Like this is what they did with like all of the different slaves. They had the slaves of all the different races. Like, you know, they started coming together in the down in the colony of Virginia, and then after that there was a purpose segmentation by slaves, by races, and they would give like a little bit better and a little bit worse to different slaves to create that, like, you know, to get people angry at each other, like just to create like that little bit of charge. So the same thing is kind of happening with the medical profession. So we've been conditioned. If you're, you know, younger than 80 years old, you've been conditioned one way or the other to look at doctors in a certain way. And again, doctors are like anything. They're good people, they're bad people. I'd say probably for the most part, to be a doctor, their chances are like, maybe they're a little bit more compassionate, maybe a little bit more caring of other people than, a cross section of investment bankers. That I would say that. But if you are a doctor in the United States, well, the first thing is you have to be very, very driven. You have to be very, very driven. Chances are, like somewhere between like middle school or high school, you had a something happen inside your mind that was like, I want to be a doctor. Whatever that was like, whether you wanted to be that which has been propagandized to be so spectacular. The same reason why they sell soldiers to people, and they sell, anything which is really kind of sold through media or through stories. Like when we as children want to do or become that, it's part of that is going to be the influence of how that particular profession has been sold. And maybe some doctors, they come from families of doctors, and maybe there is a general interest in like, I want to serve my fellow man, and all of that sort of stuff. But no matter what the actual motivation was, like usually like at an early age you need to say like, I want to go and do this. And getting into medical school is very, very difficult, and it is highly, highly competitive. So if someone is going to want to become a doctor, they got to start preparing, and they got to say, well, if I'm going to get into this school, I got to do whatever I can to get into this school. What are all of the hoops which I need to do? And so what we're seeing is like really like maybe starting as early as middle school, probably in high school, most definitely by undergraduate college, you are like, all right, I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to do all the things which I need to do in order to be a doctor. I need to have these type of activities. I need to take these classes. I need to be smart. I need to get such and such scores on my tests, and I'm going to do all of that. And like, that's not everyone has that in them. This is someone who is both driven, but also is going to be fairly competitive too, because this is a tough sort of thing. Like, this is very much like fighting for resources. There are only so many seats at medical schools, and so it's like, there is a natural competitiveness in anyone who's going to be drawn into this. And this is also someone who's saying that they are going to do whatever the system says I need to get in here. I'm going to be following those rules because I want this. I want this carrot at the end of this, which I'm chasing after. And so it's like we're beginning to see like the pool of applicants are not only are they going to be smart, because you got to be super smart. Organic chemistry is not an easy thing. In order to get into medical school. And then you gotta, all these super smart people are competing. I mean, this is very similar to what you see in Wall Street, and in a little similar in certain ways, different in other ways, but there's all this competition, and it tends to brings things out. So okay, you go through all the steps necessary to get into medical school, and you've gotten into medical school. And what you've done is you have demonstrated that that you're good enough, you're smart enough. Like, it's like you made the cut. Like, there's the competitive itch inside of you is going to be like really, really like stroked, I guess you could say. I know, one of those, I suppose. And so it's like that energy has been evoked. But now you're into the next level, and like now you're getting into like super duper stress. So we already have a certain type of personality type, or at least behavior set, which is required to get to medical school. And now we go into medical school. And so medical school is just like, it's known for being very, very stressful. Everything about it is stressful. The amount of work, the amount of learning, everything you need to learn. And one of the things which I think is interesting is, I don't know if this is true. I've never actually seen the curriculum of medical school, but what I understand is like no major medical school requires one a credit in nutrition in order to graduate. So keep this in mind. All of our medical schools, like primarily all of them are somehow related to the Rockefeller. The major ones are going to be related to the Rockefeller funding from the Rockefeller Foundation at some point. And all of these medical schools are influenced by where they got their initial money, because the initial money, when you give the money, you get to have some influence in terms of the direction in which the school goes. All these schools decided, like, you know what, nutrition ain't important. So, but what is important is that these students get worked. They get worked really, really hard. They've been hard workers before, but now they're going to be worked harder than they've ever had to work before. And so that's just kind of like recognized as like part of the normal rite of passage of becoming a doctor. And I imagine, like, I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine when doctors are around doctors, there's a certain sort of like, an understanding that you went through what I went through, like, and particularly if they went through the same schools, like if something is particularly rigorous, like, probably the same thing, like if you're in the military, like, all Marines, like they went through, any sort of shared, very difficult experiences, which you're like, you know what, you and I shared that. We may not see eye to eye on anything else, but I know you had what it takes to do that, and you know what I had, what it takes to do that. And medical school is like that. Medical school gets more and more stressful. And once you graduate from medical school, you go into residency. And residency gets even more stressful. So residency is like where, why do young doctors work such awful hours? I talked about residencies. It says residents work 40 to 80 hours a week, depending on specialty, which like doesn't sound that bad. You're like, lawyers work that. With residents occasionally logging 136 out of a total of 168 possible hours in a week. Like, that's residency. Not everyone's going to do 136 hours in a week, but being pushed to that level is like part of the process of becoming a doctor in the United States. So now think about this. This was all crafted by choice by the same people who crafted everything else. They're like, this is how we're going to make our doctors. First, we're going to make it like, we know how to make artificial scarcity, and we're going to make it incredibly difficult to become a doctor. And we're going to get like a certain sort of person that's going to pull out like an amazingly driven, amazingly intelligent, very, very rational, intellectual. And we're going to go and we're going to both put them up on a pedestal, but at the same time, we're going to like, this is torture. What this is this level of stress and this level of sleep deprivation is seen in one other place. And it is consistently seen within brainwashing. I didn't even include any of these. So, we know that this is what we know. The human brain, it learns best when it gets plenty of sleep, and sleep deprivation greatly reduces our ability to learn. We know that when you learn, when you're relaxed, when you're in alpha state, you learn better. And so the happier you are, the better you learn. Why relaxed alertness provides optimum emotional climate for learning. Like, it's very, very well known that if you want someone to learn, you want to give them the most relaxing environment. Now, what's also known, I thought I grab some of these headlines, but you go and verify for yourself. Like, go and do some research on like brainwashing. Go and do some researching on like what MK Ultra like techniques which have been used. Like the top ones have to always do with like immense amount of stress and sleep deprivation. I'm not necessarily saying that residency is on that level, but it's in that ballpark, and it's to create the same end result. And so what happens when you are in the relaxed state of learning, the part of the brain, what we call like the higher mind, the higher parts of the brain are able to be actively engaged. And what this does is allows for real analytical thinking, and you can see things from all of these different perspectives. You're reaching like these, what they call like executive levels of awareness, where you can see things from different levels. You're not attached to the emotional level, you're above the limbic, and you can look at ideas. And that's why you want to learn like that, because you're stressed, you're easy, you can look at these ideas. Oh, I can think about this and I can think about that, and you can really learn. Now, if you are not in that place and you are in your lower brain, your reptilian brain is being really activated. And how that's being activated is through like immense amount of stress and lack of sleep. So that's something else. It's you're doing brain stuff, but you're doing brain stuff on a different level. And this is where you are like ingraining natural responses. And there's a time and a place for this. Like, this is why, like, let's say like fighter pilot training is in such a way so that when you are in the most stressful situation, you're not thinking, you are responding the way you've been programmed to respond. Military training is very, very much like this. And so this is a military training of really teaching. It's not teaching how to think, it's teaching how to respond based upon training. And that is what the outcrop of someone who comes out of medical school is going to they're going to be trained for that. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up, and the reason why I'm bringing this up now on March 16th, is right now so much of what we're being told is who to listen to, because no one knows. I don't know, like, how real this is. Like, I mean, obviously a lot of it is propagandized, but, is there a real sort of like manufactured virus? Is there something real mixed in with like an agenda? You got to sit back and you got to look. So like we're all kind of figuring this out, at least we are right now. And part of what's happening is because everyone who is witnessing this, who is in an emotionally charged state, because that's what's going on right now. We're going into uncharted territory. We've never seen this before. They've not shut down the entire planet before for 15 days, right? For 15 days. And so what's going to happen is, we're talking about big numbers here. That's what's going on is there's a purposeful direction of the largest numbers of people, the masses. And what they're doing with the masses is they're pointing them back to the medical establishment. And the masses are upset and they're looking to be led to, because they haven't been told anything. If you're part of the masses, we're all part of, we're all affected by this one way or the other. Like even those of us that think we're completely detached from it, we're still picking up, the total collective energy, unless you're like on some mountain somewhere. We're like on the top of the roller coaster. It's about to go down right now, one way or the other. And so, but what's being told to the masses, and is go back to the medical establishment. These are the people who you can trust. You want to feel safe. This is where you're going to feel safe. And the people who you're pointing to are the people who have been trained been trained incredibly, diligently by the very, very same institutions who've created all this. And so in terms of being able to navigate, what's being said, how people are responding, and if you want to do it with a higher degree of awareness, and if you want to do it with some degree of compassion, you have to realize, most people didn't realize what they were signing up for when they accepted their ticket. So this feels like a good place to stop right now. Any questions or comments? Put it in the comment field. This is Mike. It is March 16th, 2020, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.